Do you want a cartridge for little birds? Done. Do you want a cartridge for big birds? Done. How about deer? Done. How about even bigger animals than deer? Done. How about a cartridge that has less than lethal options? I don't have any of those. Oh, okay. Well, they exist. And let's just say that hypothetically, you're kind of underwhelmed by the performance of the standard 2 3/4 inch shell. Well, let me tell you, if your shotgun can handle it, you have two other options above it in terms of power. And that's all potentially out of one single shotgun. So consider yourself sold on a 12 gauge. There is no denying that the 12 gauge is probably the most versatile cartridge in existence. These are all different 12 gauge loads right here, and essentially they're all using slightly different projectiles, especially these slugs right here. They're way different than all the other projectiles. But basically, this is a small fraction of the 12 gauge loads that are actually available on the market, and the 12 gauge is so versatile that it should have you covered for just about any game animal in North America. Sure, the 10 gauge is more powerful than the 12 gauge, but let's be honest, how many times have you seen 10 gauge ammo on the shelves? Probably not in most stores. I will admit though that the 20 gauge is a pretty close second in my opinion, but it just does not have the payload of a 12 gauge. Before all this inflation and craziness, 12 gauge used to be one of the cheapest centerfire cartridges to shoot. Usually you could go into the store and find a 100 round box for around $20. The price, like everything else, has gone up quite a bit since then, but if we're being honest, the real story is the price of 12 gauge firearms. 12 gauge is just about the cheapest, if not the cheapest cartridge that you can currently buy a firearm chambered in. But on the other hand, it's also one of the most expensive cartridges that you can buy a firearm chambered in. Anyways, even with the price of inflation and everything, some 12 gauge shotguns can be found for right around $200 currently. I am definitely not saying that they're the best things in the world, but with that much versatility and firepower, that is insane bang for your buck. And if you want to go even cheaper than that for some reason, I wouldn't recommend them, but there are a bunch of Turkish-made shotguns that are currently flooding the markets that can be had for under $200 in some cases. There's a common misconception when it comes to shotguns, not necessarily just a 12 gauge, but just shotguns in general, and that's that you could just point anywhere and shoot and hit whatever's coming after you. And I mean, if you're using anything other than a slug, a shotgun's gonna have more spread than just a bullet itself. But let's see what this actually looks like at practical self-defense ranges. We're gonna be starting at 7 yards, and I got some cardboard downrange so that we can measure exactly how far each of the shots spread. This is going to be the shotgun that we're using, and it's a pretty typical self-defense shotgun with an 18.5-inch barrel along with no choke, meaning that we should see just about maximum spread. We're going to go ahead and start with birdshot, and although I don't recommend it for self-defense, unless you're defending yourself from pigeons or something, we're going to see just how much it spreads at 7 yards. Well, I shot twice just to be sure, and it looks like on each of them we got about a maximum spread of close to 12 inches, but most of the BBs in here were within 9 inches. See, same on this one as well. And now we're going to test just about the most common self-defense load out there, double-aught buckshot. Keep in mind that this does not have any type of flight control wad to keep it in a tighter pattern, so we should see the maximum spread. I originally shot over here, but remembered that the camera was not pointing that direction, so these are both shots down here. As you can see, there is basically no spread at all at 7 yards. I mean, 4 inches on each of them. Keep in mind, like I had said, there is absolutely no choke on this shotgun, so that's about the maximum spread you're gonna see. 4 inches is definitely not much. Now we're gonna go ahead and test slugs. Obviously it's gonna be one projectile, but let's go ahead and see what it does. Wait a second, I thought you said there'd only be one projectile. There is, but that hole is from the wad right there. But let's just say that you have an extra massive house. Let's go ahead and back up to 25 yards. Okay, out of that 18-inch barrel without a choke, keep that in mind, the birdshot spread a little over 4 foot. But like I said, that's not really a self-defense load, so let's go ahead and check out buckshot. Alright, with that buckshot, it looks like we got all 9 pellets on this piece of cardboard right here, so let's go ahead and measure it. Looks like it's about 20.5 inches center to center on those outside pellets. Like I said though, that's not even with a flight control wad or anything. That's just standard buckshot, and it didn't even spread that much at 25 yards. And obviously, the slug is what it is. I think that these tests just go to show that although shotguns do spread quite a bit, they're not going to hit every single thing in their direction, especially at closer ranges. But I can't make a video without there being any drawbacks, right? You're right. Although the 12 gauge is a super versatile cartridge, there are a few drawbacks, and the number one drawback in my mind is how large of a cartridge the 12 gauge is. Wait, I thought that size was a good thing. It is. In certain situations. As we all know, the bigger in size something is, the more weight it usually has, and the more room it usually takes up. Other than the Golden Hall, this is going to be just about the most basic 12 gauge round that you can find at just about any store. I'll put the specs up here on the screen. Anyways, let's go ahead and see how much it weighs. Looks like it weighs 686.5 grains. Now this is going to be your standard 5.56 with a 55 grain FMJ. Let's see how much this weighs to compare. 178.6 grains. So if my math is correct, and I am pretty sure it is, the 12 gauge right here is approximately 3.84 times heavier than this 5.56 right here. So in practical terms, if we round up slightly, we can carry 4 5.56 rounds for every one 12 gauge round. And keep in mind that this 12 gauge is a pretty light load. Paired nicely with its size is the 12 gauge's next biggest drawback, its capacity. The 12 gauge is just not known for having a high capacity. How many rounds of 2 3/4 inch 12 gauge do you think that this shotgun with this massive magazine tube right here can hold? Maybe 12, 15, 20 even? Nope, it's only able to hold 9 + 1 of 2 3/4 inch 12 gauge, even with that massive tube. The highest capacity shotgun that I currently know of on the market is the Kel-Tec KS25. It holds 12 rounds of 2 3/4 inch 12 shot in each of the magazine tubes, plus 1 in the chamber, making up for 25 total shells. A standard AR-15 will hold 30 rounds in the magazine plus 1 in the chamber, making up for 31 total rounds, and it is nowhere close to the size of that behemoth. Well, is there any way that I could increase the capacity of my 12 gauge? Yes, actually, if you're using a tube-fed magazine, not a detachable box magazine, and that's the shorty shot shells right here. This is a standard 2 3/4 inch 12 gauge load right here, and this is a shorty shot shell. As you can see, it is quite a bit shorter than this 2 3/4 inch shell right here, and it's actually a full inch shorter at 1 3/4 inches long. This means that for every 2 of these, you can fit 3 of these in the same space, so the shorty shot shells are a pretty good way of increasing capacity. The only problem with them though is that they are pretty finicky. And when I say pretty finicky, I mean really finicky. Basically, they're not going to be able to cycle in most shotguns, especially if you're running a semi-auto shotgun. They're just not going to have enough juice to cycle the action back. And what you're also giving up is quite a bit of payload with the shorty shot shells compared to a regular shell, as well as a decent amount of velocity. But other than all these issues, they're a pretty good way of increasing capacity. The 12 gauge is not known for being a long-range cartridge, especially when you start talking about birdshot or buckshot loads like these. Basically, depending on the choke that you're using, you can kind of expect these cartridges to have a maximum effective range of about 50 to 60 yards. That's not to say that they're not dangerous beyond that, but that's kind of their maximum effective range. Now when we start talking about rifled slugs, this increases that maximum effective range to about 100 yards, but realize that there's still going to be a lot of drop with these. Now if you really wanted to maximize the range of the 12 gauge, then we would start looking at Sabot slugs. The big difference between Sabot slugs and basically any other shotgun projectile out there is that Sabot slugs require a rifled barrel to function properly, unlike the smoothbore that basically everything else is fired out of. The rifling is required because Sabot slugs are actually a smaller diameter than the bore itself, so there's nothing to stabilize them, and they're actually riding inside a plastic wad until they exit the barrel. This spin stabilizes the bullet, and because Sabot slugs are a smaller diameter than the bore itself, they usually have a much better ballistic coefficient than traditional rifled slugs. So this pushes their effective range out to about 200 yards before the performance really starts to drop off. If you were looking for the most versatile cartridge in existence, basically one cartridge that can do just about anything, the 12 gauge would be really hard to beat. Other than its range limitations and its capacity limitations, there isn't too much that the cartridge can't do. But anyways, I really hope that you enjoyed today's video. Thanks so much for watching, and remember, don't let ballistics drive you bananas.